Alright, today I want to change the rear upper ball joint on the Jeep WJ. And you go, ball joint in the rear? Yeah, it's a Jeep thing. Right there, you can see, that's the ball joint there. And it is in the center of this A-arm control arm here, and it attaches on both ends here with that bolt right there. Now that bolt and the same one on the other side, and then these three bolts here, one here, there's one back over there, and there's one right here. All of those bolts you have to take off to do this job, so you can lift that control arm up off the ball joint and then get it out of there. But all of those bolts are the tightest bolts that were seized up, each one of them, that I just could not break free. Couldn't get it with a socket, couldn't get it with a wrench. Sprayed them, hammered on them, nothing. Used a breaker bar, didn't work. I used a air tool, didn't work. So, if you look at one of my other videos, I changed the drive shaft on the front of the Jeep, and I took the old one and I cut the ends off so it would give me extra leverage for jobs just like this. Now, I've wrenched around on cars my whole life. Every car I've ever had I wrenched around on, pretty much tore the whole thing apart and put it back together. But never have I had bolts this tight that I couldn't get them off. Like I said, not even with air. So I had to apply this to the breaker bar and a socket to break these things free on the sides, and those ones there with a wrench, and this drive shaft extension. And then they finally broke free. It was incredible. Now, you'd think the ball joint has a nut on top of the control arm here holding it on. You'd think that would be the tightest of everything torqued down. But no, that actually came off with great ease. I'm not sure it was even torqued all the way. So anyways, I want to change that ball joint because going over some bumps, sometimes you get this sort of little clunk noise in the back, and I'm suspecting it's the ball joint. So I'm going to change that. I've got a new one, and once we get all these bolts off, then I can pull that out and put the new one in. So that's what we're doing right now. I sprayed these bolts here. Gonna let that soak up for a while, and we'll continue with this later. Alright, so coming back to this now, you're going to want to remove this bolt here and this bolt here to drop your brake line down, and pull your emergency brake cables off this control arm also, so that we can slide the control arm up and back out of the way off of that ball joint and put the new one in. So we're going to remove all these bolts now. It's been soaking for some time here, and then we'll get that old ball joint out. Okay, wow, so I've got the control arm unbolted at the two long bolts from the chassis, and the nut off the top of the ball joint, and I'm working on these three that bolt the ball joint plate to the rear axle center section. And the two back ones, they're coming out okay. The control arm does not want to release from the ball joint, so I have to use a wrench and undo these three that hold the plate to the pumpkin. The back two are coming out okay, but the front one is not. It is super tight. And I have to use this extra lever here that I made from the old drive shaft on the wrench just to get enough leverage on this thing. You know, this bolt is really stubborn. It's like, isn't that Archimedes in that quote? Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum and I could move the whole world. Feels like that almost. Anyway, gonna keep at it here. Alright, so as you can see, I got the control arm, just slid it out of here now. I got those bolts loose and here it is. So I'm going to take a hammer and knock that ball joint out of there, and then we'll install the new one. So yeah, here it is, and I got my heavy hammer here. This thing is super solid. We're going to give that a few whacks and that should break free, and then we'll put the new one in and get the control arm back in. Okay, so yeah, just a couple of whacks and that came out. You can see the underside doesn't look too great. Boot is okay. I don't know. Anyway, moves pretty easy. So there's probably some play in there. So anyway, we'll put a new one in now. We'll mount that in place first with those 3 bolts, and then we'll put the control arm back in on top. Yeah, so here's a new one compared to the old one. And yeah, it doesn't move nearly as easily, that's for sure. This one just moves very easily. So, world of difference, and hopefully that will be the solution to the occasional clunk out of the rear end. So we'll get that installed now. Alright, as you can see, I've got the new ball joint and plate in place. I got the bolts started by hand, and I'm going to zip them on with a ratcheting wrench here and then torque them. Okay, so I put the new ball joint in and the new plate and torqued those 3 bolts down to 100 pounds. I'm going to pull that nut off now and then slip the control arm back in. Since it's out, I took this opportunity to wipe down the control arm and clean it up. So yeah, looks a lot better. I'm gonna go and slip that in now. Okay, so I've jacked up the body right now at the back under the hitch. And that will give some clearance underneath to slip that control arm into the frame brackets. So then you're gonna slip the control arm into its brackets here, attach the bolts, thread them in by hand first, and then tighten them up with a wrench. Do that on both sides. And then once you have those tight, then I'll show you what I've done. I've taken a ratchet strap and tied that around the transmission cross member all the way back around the back of the pumpkin here. Now you want to be careful, of course, to make sure that nothing is caught in the way, no brake lines or anything. You just want to grab the top of the pumpkin there, just below that plate of your ball joint. Because what happens is the axle has pivoted back, and you need to bring it forward so that the ball joint goes into that hole properly. So once you tighten the strap up, it pivots the pumpkin back into proper orientation, and then you can start tightening up that nut on top, which I've got the ratchet there and I'm doing right now. And after that, then you torque it down and you're done. So anyway, that is the long and the short of changing the rear upper ball joint on a Jeep WJ. And then of course you got to reattach your brake line bolts here when you're done. All that stuff. And then you're totally done. So there you go. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out my other videos, and see you again next time. Bye. You know, liking and subscribing really helps a small channel, so thank you so much.